that way. Okay, so let's dive in. I'm going to project from my screen. Okay, so welcome to the Creative Schools Fund information sessions. We are going to talk about the fund for those of you who haven't been familiar with it in the past. It is a public-private partnership. It represents funding from the mayor's office, the Chicago Public Schools Chief Education Office, through the Department of Arts Education, and then the private institutional and individual donors of Ingenuity. And altogether, the fund puts out about $1.5 million in grants each year directly to schools. So the fund is only available to schools. However, schools work with organizations or partners in order to propose a project or program. And so we do see ourselves as supporting both of those parts of the ecosystem, even though the only kind of eligible parties to apply for a grant are schools. And over the last almost 10 years, the fund has invested almost 18 million directly into schools. And so this year, we are excited to talk about this opportunity before us. And so you all know we will post these slides online so you can have access to them afterwards. So if you are a school or teacher, this is an opportunity for a partnerships grant to bring a new partner into your school or to expand on an existing partnership. It's an opportunity perhaps to add a final performance or exhibition, field trips, supplies that you wish you had to support your residency with an arts organization. And this year we are making a big change, which is instead of being able to support partnerships within the application year or immediately following, we've extended that timeline. So we are supporting partnership proposals for either kind of immediate spring programming or immediate fall programming this school year or next year, but all the way through essentially 2026. And so 3.5 years of programming potential through this one grant application. The grant sizes reflect that. So organization schools, you can partner together over a whole year and apply for $20,000 for that year. Or if you apply for all 3.5 years, you can apply for up to $70,000. So it's essentially $10,000 for each program period, which we'll talk about in a second. And we're also excited about this, not just because there are obvious sort of sustainability challenges in the arts education world coming out of the pandemic, as organizations work to stabilize their programs, start to sort of try to stabilize arts education offerings. We want to make sure that organizations are able to sort of go through the next wave of post-pandemic rebuilding in a way that helps their budgets with predictability and planning. But for schools, it also adds this level of predictability. So outside the CPS annual budget cycle, this is a chance to think farther ahead for what would become guaranteed funding for a partnership or a program over multiple years. And so we are excited for schools to be able to conduct strategic planning for the arts over the course of multiple years, to be able to build a partnership scope and sequence where they're able to really think about whether it's the same group of students who are deepening their arts involvement over a series of years, or broadening the participants to an entire grade band each year, for example. There are lots of opportunities here. On the arts organization side, we're excited too about the potential for co-designing programs and residencies. I've already talked about sustainable sources of revenue, but I would also say it's an opportunity for stability within the teaching artist world. So we are hopeful that the programs will come in and say, we will have the same teaching artist over the course of this entire project, multiple years. Or we are going to have a different teaching artist based on the discipline that we're doing at any given time. Either way, the organization can predict that revenue as they think about supporting their teaching artists, if their teaching artists are not on full-time salary, for example. So That's what we're excited about. And I do want to give hats off because the Ingenuity Board of Directors has made this possible. So any funds committed in the future will be covered by Ingenuity. And the Board of Directors has committed to growing their fundraising efforts and to sustaining the Creative Schools Fund for multiple years in a row. So that's what's made this change possible. This fall, we are accepting partnership applications that is typically residencies and oriented towards student learning experiences. It may be programs directly to students, field trips. It can also be a substantial component of the grant to have teacher professional learning or professional development opportunities. And so we have seen organizations come and work side by side with a solo arts teacher in the school who doesn't really have other arts teachers to bounce things off of and become kind of the community for that teacher's arts instruction, or building new skills, learning new instruments, thinking about new practice areas, or even curriculum building. The grants that are being applied for this fall do require partnership with an arts organization or a teaching artist, a solo teaching artist. And so that is part of the deal. In the winter, we'll be running these invitation-only applications around specific areas tied to Creative Schools certification, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I won't go into depth on those, but you can find out more in our grant guidelines that are posted online. I'm going to kind of roll through the first part of Angela and then open for questions, like a pause for questions in a couple slides. So Angela, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Eli. So I do work mainly with the Creative Schools Survey, with Outlook, and with calculating Creative Schools certification scores. And so here's a quick overview for not just schools, a little bit for partners too, to give you some context for the Creative Schools Fund. And so the Creative Schools certification is essentially a score tied to your arts programming at every single school in CPS. Where all this data goes and where you can input it, and there will be also a little bit later on how to access the Creative Schools Survey, will be through Outlook Map. Outlook Map is a public-facing website. So as an arts partner, for one, your organization should have an Outlook profile. If you're not sure, you can also email us. I'll include an email right now. But hopefully you have an Outlook profile so that you can update your data for your offerings. And from school data and partner data, this all comes together in Outlook Map. Outlook Map can be found at chicago.outlookmap.com, and again, is public-facing. So for the Creative School certification, this reflects the degree to which schools have met district benchmarks for access to high-quality arts instruction for every student. We use those individual data points of each metric to calculate your Creative School certification, and those data points can be found on Outlook Map. And so on the next slide, we'll also give you a quick overview on what exactly is contained or within the Creative Schools certification. And so when you fill out the Creative Schools survey, your school will automatically have a Creative Schools certification score later throughout the year. And so there's no explicit step to completing the survey and then getting a score. But as a quick overview, the Creative Schools certification is made up of 100 points, and most of the points go to the domain of access with 64 points there. So on the left, we see the two domains of access and quality. The second domain of the certification is the quality, and that is 36 points. And so taking a quick look, these are the point allocations here. You can also see a more in-depth version of the rubric that's designed on Ingenuity's website, but to highlight a few things that are tied to explicitly some of the Creative Schools Fund is, I would say, a lot of the access benchmarks. And so let's take a quick look at those at the top of that table. For the 4 metrics, we have staffing, minutes of instruction, percent access, and then also disciplines in depth. And then Eli, I actually think we see it says click to exit full screen. Perfect.
Right.
Thank
Okay,
you.
there we go, for sure.
And so if your school's an elementary school, the metrics that will apply will be staffing, minutes, and percent access. If you're high school, you'll have staffing and disciplines in depth. For the benchmarks, you can see them, Eli has laid them out on the right. So for the staffing ratio, what we're really looking for is 1 to 350 for one teacher to 350 students. And for the teacher, we're looking for a certified or endorsed arts instructor. For minutes of instruction, this is calculated as average weekly minutes of instruction provided to elementary students. And the benchmark for that to be rated as the highest, which is excelling to meet standards, that is 120 minutes of instruction. For percent access, we want 100% of students in your school to have access to arts instruction, and hopefully at 120 minutes weekly. For high schools, we have a different benchmark. Instead of minutes and percent access, we have disciplines and depth. And this surveys the number of disciplines your high school offers, as well as the depth, as in the amount of sequential learning. And so together, that is pulled together in a single metric called disciplines and depth. For quality, we have other items that are generally more resource neutral. And just taking a quick look here, we have which standards you're using, how the arts are involved in school governance, what is your arts budget. And this year, or I should say starting last year, we're also including information about not just district funding, but funding as a whole. And this includes, for example, if you do get CSF grant money, that should go within your budget figure. For the next ones, we have 3 yes/no questions, and this is for whether or not you have arts partnerships. And so this is why it's important here to partner with an arts partner. This is worth 4 points. And while that may not seem a lot, it is only 10 points between each benchmark on the Creative School certification. And you get an additional 4 points for having an arts partnership. We also have metrics for having professional development and whether or not there's family or community engagement. And lastly, whether or not you're explicitly using any instructional approaches in your school. So all in all, this makes up 100 points on the Creative School certification. So on this slide, you can also see here, these are some examples that we just walked through. We were mainly talking through the top row of each of these metrics, as in what were the benchmarks for excelling. And so you see here for minutes of instruction, we see the 120 or more, access to arts instruction, 100%, staffing, 350 or fewer, and then budget, we didn't go in depth here, but we are looking for $7 or more per student to achieve the full 8 points on that metric. You can see all the benchmarks at the link below, and that includes like a design rubric, such as what you're seeing here. So on this slide, we now have some instructions on how to log in. So if you are an arts liaison, you should have access to ArtLookMap. And you should go to chicago.artlookmap.com. In the top right, you should see a school portal, and there will be instructions to log in. You can log in either if there will be 2 pathways, one if you have a CPS email address and one if you do not. I think it's fairly straightforward, but if you do have any issues with resetting your password or you see an error message of an account not found, message us at artlook@ingenuity-inc.org. I am behind that email address, as well as my colleague, Christine Ean, who's our new data analyst. So she's not here in the Zoom meeting, but we both monitor this mailbox and we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. And if you're, oh yes, go ahead.
I was going to ask if you could just talk quickly about the partner.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect.
So if you're also an arts partner, you have a login portal too, and that's shown us here as a screenshot. So if you're an arts partner, you won't see a Creative School survey when you log in, but you will see your profile. And that is part of the public facing map where you can really broadcast your program offerings. And we do have a relatively new feature called the toggle, in which you can toggle whether or not you're actively looking for partnerships. We have also had different training sessions for just arts liaisons, one last week. And throughout those sessions, we are also trying to broadcast the arts partners that have toggled yes and showing individuals how they can find those arts partners. And so Artlook is a great site for you to connect with one another, but also it is beneficial for data sharing across the sector and is used a lot in our different advocacy efforts.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so the rest of this session, we're going to be walking through components of the application, and we'll speak about how those tie to some of the parameters and guidelines that you might have seen online. But we want to make sure that you also understand sort of how the application works and flag some things for you. Before we start that, are there any questions?
I have a question. So for our budget in the Creative Arts Survey, we include any money we got from Ingenuity in the budget?
Yes, that is relatively new. So this started with the 2020 to 21 survey. We changed the wording from district funding to just funding. So the short answer is yes, please include CSF grants. To know also the surveys about the prior year, just to make that clear. So it's not asking you to estimate how much CSF grants you'll get this year, but it was how much money you received last year. And yes, it should include Ingenuity grants.
Okay, thank you.
One question. This is my first year. I never filled out a grant or whatever. Is there anybody to help in that area? No, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So is that to apply for the grant or for the certification survey?
I guess the grant.
Sure. I'm going to put in the in the chat the address for Sarah, who introduced herself earlier and is behind the Creative Schools Fund email. So you can just reach out to her.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Okay, so on the Ingenuity homepage here in the upper left, you will see this text below, which includes the Creative Schools Fund guidelines. And that is sort of the go-to source for everything that you might need to know about applying this year. You'll also see this link to the CSF grant application. That's a Google Doc with all of the grant content. It is not the application itself. And we'll talk about how you get to the application in a second. But we wanted to put that up, first of all, because we could put it up before we actually opened the application. And so it's like a little sneak preview, but also because for those of you who are kind of working offline or for partners that might not see the whole application unless they log in with the school, it's a chance to see all of the content that will be included. There may be tweaks in there as we sort of go through, just so you know, the source of truth, or the only place to go to answer the questions in the application, is what we call submittable. That's our online system. And so on the Ingenuity website, you'll see this button at the bottom that says click here to apply. That opens this partnership grant application in the submittable system. And you can either create a new account or sign in with an existing account. And you can also, if you forgot your password, there's a button for that as well. So once you get into the application, the first thing that we'll ask about is eligibility. And so to be eligible for a grant, a school has to complete the Creative Schools survey that Angela spoke about. That is open now. It is due soon. So a school must complete the survey before they're eligible. We check all of that on the other end when applications are in. A school must also confirm that is the arts liaison applying for the grant. The role of the arts liaison in the school is it's a principal nominated position. And we see the arts liaison is responsible for strategic planning in the arts. So it's possible that it is an English teacher, for example, who is interested in bringing a literature program to their school with theater, for example, from an arts partner. And the arts liaison would coordinate with that English teacher in order to submit the grant. The arts liaison also sort of navigates if there are multiple teachers who want to apply for different components or different grants. They'll have to work with that team to make sure we narrow down to just one. So each school can only submit one application this fall. The arts liaison would also play a pretty central role with securing the arts partner and forming that relationship, coming to agreements on how the budget will be allocated between the partner and the school's needs, etc. So once you've gotten through the eligibility questions, there is now an option right at the top to send up what we call the partner application to the arts organization or teaching artist who you're planning to work with. This is new this year. I think we heard from partners a lot that they didn't have a lot of sight lines into the application itself, and that it would be helpful for them to actually be able to provide information of their own. We also have asked new questions that are really more appropriate for an arts organization. So we've introduced this component called the partner application. This is a form that is sent over email to your arts organization or teaching artist, and then they will complete it, submit it, and it becomes a part of your application. For those of you who are arts organizations, you'll want to do this independently and share the parts that are relevant to the school. The entire content is not actually shared with the school. So you want to be in like close communication talking about who's covering what elements between these two. So we would encourage, if you are a school applying for a grant, please send this form to your partner as soon as possible so they can be as prepared as they need to be to fill out the form, and so that your application isn't delayed because the form is not in. Then, as the school, you will move to questions about the timing of the grant you're proposing and how much funding you'll be asking for. Here at the bottom in navy, you'll see what we've called program periods. These are essentially half a year in length. So from September to December, the first half of a school year, or the second half of a school year from January to June, all the way through 2026. You can apply just for one sort of semester program period rather than multiple, or you can actually apply for all of these program periods through June 2026, or anything in between. The couple of things that we would ask is that, first of all, any application that you put in this fall is starting program in either the January to June 2023 period or the September to December 2023 period. So we will not accept applications that don't start until March of school year 23-24, for example. It has to kind of start this spring or in the fall. We also will be, so there will be a sort of one set of questions if all you're applying for is this spring or fall or both. And then another set of questions if you're applying for funding for 2024 and beyond. So then the last thing I would say about this is that we are supporting up to $10,000 for each program period. So for example, if you're going to program this spring and the following fall, you could apply for up to $20,000. If you're applying for all of these program periods, you can apply for up to $70,000. We aren't asking what component of the funding is for which year. We just kind of want the total at this point. And then as we go through the years, you can start to say this is the allocation across each part of the year. Down here at the bottom, you'll see this question: are you applying for any programming after December 2023? If you say yes, because you've got 2024 program periods in your proposal, that then will bring up some multi-year questions that are captured here. So if you select yes, then these additional questions around your goals for a multi-year partnership and how you're going to meet those goals, et cetera, will appear. The goals for a multi-year partnership that we've outlined here are just the starting point. These are the benefits that we see to a partnership that occurs over multiple school years. It could be that there is a group of students who are progressing through the grades and also growing their arts skills or depth of knowledge over those years. It might also be that the third graders just don't get enough arts. They don't get that 120 minutes yet. And before you're able to get to 120 minutes, you're bringing in an arts partner to just work with the third grade over the next couple of years. We're looking for custom approaches. So we want to see strong collaboration between a school and an arts partner in order to really build a plan that covers multiple years rather than sort of a plug and play approach. And then communities of practice is another area where I spoke about earlier, where the teaching artist or the organization and the arts teacher in the school are really collaborating and planning together, kind of designing together, teaching side by side, et cetera. We certainly don't expect all of these to be true. Feel free to click just one. But if there are multiple, please feel free to do that too. And then we've got an other field because we know that we might not be covering all of the potential benefits of a multi-year partnership. And we want to hear from you what you're hoping to accomplish. There are additional sections. These are relevant for all of the program types, whether it's just this spring or for multiple years in a row. So there's a question asking about the role of the school in the role of the arts in school governance. You'll remember that Angela talked about that as part of the certification survey questions, and we're asking about it to understand whether the continuous improvement work plan, or the CIWP for your school, includes arts-focused strategies, and whether arts educators sit on the instructional leadership team or the writing team for the CIWP. For the rest of the application, we are only asking about the first program period that you'll be conducting. So say you've applied for 3.5 years of funding and you're starting this spring. For the rest of the application, we only want to know about what's happening in the spring. So we don't want you to feel like you have to squeeze 3 years of description into a single program box. We're hoping just to hear about the first period. And so we are asking for a summary of the program. We're asking for the positive arts changes that you believe students will have as a result. We'll ask about the role of the teachers in your school and the role of the principal and the rest of the administration in planning for this grant opportunity, or what role they might play in implementing it. We'll ask how you selected your partner and what kind of collaboration has taken place up to this point. And then we'll ask about the program plan. We want to understand how the program is really meeting the needs and supporting the assets of the specific student population at your school, and then your hopes for student learning and growth over the course of the program. We will ask what discipline you're working with, and you can choose one or multiple. So is it theater and visual arts, for example, on and on. What grade bands you'll be supporting, all the way from preschool up to 12th grade, the number of weeks that the residency will take place. We see a lot of 10-week residencies. We also see 15-week residencies. And then confirmation that student programming is taking place during the school day. So we do not support programs that are after school or before school or in the summer. We only will allocate funding to programs happening in the school day. And the reason for that is that the mission of Ingenuity and this partnership with CPS is that there is increased access to arts, high quality arts instruction for every student in every grade in every school. The best way to get there is by embedding it right in the school day. We're then going to ask for budget information, and I will reiterate, this is just for the first program period. So even if you're programming this spring and then again in the fall, we just want to hear about this spring. If you're programming over 2 or 3 years, but starting in the fall, we just want to hear about the fall. So we want to know the total funding request. It can be up to $10,000 for that first program period. And then there are these budget categories. These are specifically aligned to the budget lines in Oracle, for those of you who are in the Oracle system, that your clerk will know about, the school clerk will know about. And this is how CPS knows where to load the funds for the program. And so it's important that you and the partner are on the same page about how funds will be allocated for their purchase order. And it's important that you have a good plan around supplies, teacher planning. So we do support teacher extended day, non-instructional time so that you can plan with your arts organization or teaching artist or for the program. Supplies, field trips, and then of course, arts partner services, which are typically the professional development and then the direct instruction to students around the residency. There are a couple of nuances in the budget. So the first is that if there are supplies for the program that are not protected intellectual property of an arts organization, it is expected that the school purchases those supplies, and there would need to be a strong argument around the arts partner purchasing supplies rather than the school. That argument would usually tie to it being the intellectual property of their program or their organization or that teaching artist. The other thing that I'll say is that, one second, I have to look at my notes. Any software or technology that the arts organization is bringing to the school would have to be approved by the CPS IT department before it's used. And so if you are including anything like that in the budget, that is important to just clear and make sure that it's got that approval from IT. That is anything requiring a login from a student or a teacher. So if it's just sort of open on the web and anybody can use it without logging in, it's not as relevant. But if it requires students or teachers to log in, then it does need to be approved by CPS IT. We ask here for the specific funding for each budget line. And again, this is how CPS will load the funds into your school budget. And it can get a little complicated to move funds between lines. So we want to make sure that you've got a good sense of how the funding needs to be spent on the front end when you're applying. And then we'll ask for a description of the budget items. So for example, when you're working with your partner, or if you are the partner organization, you might say, we're going to do 10 weeks of programming at this much, this cost per hour. And so totaling all of that up, it ends up being this. That's how you would describe that budget line in the narrative section below. So program supplies, you might say this pays for theater props and costumes, or dance shoes for the whole third grade, et cetera, participating in the final performance, whatever it might be, you're kind of describing what it is. And then submitting. So as a school, you attest that, that anything that you don't use on the grant will come back to the CPS General Fund and be used for future grant programs. That you're going to participate in annual reporting, which is essentially a site visit during the program period, and then an end of year report telling us about the impact, and that you would not use funds for any type of legislation or election oriented stuff, et cetera. I want to sort of call out that if you are applying for a multi-year grant, a school does not have to reapply each year. So one of the big reasons we're doing this is to reduce the burden to participate in the grants. And so if a school in their partnership are awarded 3 years of funding or 2 years of funding, each year then there would be a report that's required on how things went, and then a budget for how you're going to spend the grant in the next program period. But there is not a need to go through the whole application process again. Okay, let's talk about the partner application. So this is the content in that form that the school sends to the partner when they choose their email and say, send it. And so the partner would receive an invitation to come log into Submittable and answer these questions. There's basic content information, including the vendor number. The vendor number, I cannot emphasize the importance enough. It helps us make sure that, that the CPS vendor status is set up in a way that you can start programming right away when you intend to. If there are any quirks with the vendor number, like the contact information isn't updated in the vendor portal, or the vendor number has lapsed, then we would need to work very quickly to try to get that vendor number back in place, active, ready to go before programs can start. So putting in the vendor number, the lead contact information, we ask some program related questions about how you would work with students. This question around ensuring identity, relationships, and community are at the center of your programming is a CPS priority around arts education. And so we're asking how it reflects or is aligned to those CPS priorities. How your role in the school will support its work in increasing access to high quality arts education for every student in every grade. We'll ask about the organizational structure. So if you're an independent teaching artist, you would click individual. If you're an organization, there are additional questions that we ask. We ask if your tax status is a 501c3, and we'll ask you to upload that 501c3 letter. We don't necessarily have a good sense of the tax status of all of the organizations working in schools, and this gives us a little bit of information. I will say that we're also prioritizing nonprofit arts organizations as we think about future years of granting, partly because of the hits to the arts education ecosystem for those nonprofits that have been programming through the pandemic and are recuperating revenue strategies. If there is a multi-year grant within this application, then there are additional questions we'll ask of partners, just like we did of schools. We'll ask about how a multi-year grant actually makes the difference in expanding the arts to students, how you see that relationship evolving over time and a longer-term impact or goal that you want to reach. And then we want to ask about the teaching artist allocation. I said earlier that it could be the same teaching artist, it could be different teaching artists. I think we hope if the program is similar year over year that it's the same teaching artist and you're able to get to that job security for the teaching artist and continuity for the school with having a single individual assigned to the program. Knowing, of course, that people leave jobs. That's not to say that you're bound, that's not like a bound contract, but people, as much as possible, if you have a stable staff, that you have a stable teaching artist assignment for that school. If there are different teaching artists, we'd want to hear why. Are you covering different disciplines? Do you need different, as you deepen the arts sort of sequential learning, that you need sort of different skills in the mix? Just tell us about that. As we ask about teaching artists, one thing that Ingenuity is really working on is supporting organizations to be able to support their teaching artists with equitable employment practices, professional development, etc. And so we'll ask about the teaching artists information, how long they've been with your organization. We'll ask about employment terms. Are they salaried? Are they hourly? We don't, no judgment either way. We just want to collect that information. And then we want to know about teaching artist compensation. So how do you support sustainable employment for your teaching artists? And then how do you prepare teaching artists with the kind of development and support that they might need to be out in schools? These are new questions. So they're new to all of us, including us who will be reading the answers. So I would say don't worry too much as you're responding to these about what we might be thinking or what we hope, what we want out of these. We have not sort of got a predisposed position on the answers to these questions. We're more collecting the information so we can understand what might be sort of the teaching artist allocation over multiple years of granting. So the additional programs question. This is over the last couple of years, we've come to understand that sometimes the Creative Schools Fund grants are supporting a new program in a school. Other times they're supporting something that's already sort of like a year-long commitment between an arts organization and a school that might have a lot of moving pieces and piece parts. And so we just want to get a sense of, is this a new partnership to the school? Are there other programs that are being conducted by this partner in the school, and where the grant fits in? So we'll ask whether you have, as an arts organization, other programs in the school, how many weeks of programming are outside of this grant, and then what the services are. Are you conducting professional development that we don't know about, so that we get kind of that holistic picture of the partnership? Again, new questions. No prejudgment, or we're not predisposed to one way or another. We just want to collect the information. And then you'll submit. So the partner will attest to the following items. These are highly driven by CPS policies and compliance concerns. And so that's, you'll see that they're kind of aligned to the kinds of things that CPS, Department of Arts Education, cares about a lot, and that we support as part of our partnership with them in order to ensure that partnerships are following the rules, essentially. And then sort of backing out, we've now gone through most of the application components. There are a couple of application questions here and there that we didn't cover, so we encourage you to look at the entire application in depth. But these are the kind of primary or main points. The application will close October 28th. Award notifications will come through in December, usually by December 15th or so. And then funds will transfer into the budgets of the schools who have received funding in January. It is probably safe to assume that those funds will be in place by mid-January. I will say as the caveat that often the funds can kind of get tangled in the process of being kind of established inside the procurement system at CPS. And so we do our very best to meet that mid-January timeline, but sometimes we have hiccups. It is critical that an organization has set up a purchase order with a school before they start programming so they can invoice against that. That actually covers the arts organization's risks and liabilities, because you then know that those funds are encumbered and held for your services. But that is a pretty strict CPS rule. And we understand that puts you all in a tight position when those funds are delayed. We're sorry about that. We're always sorry about that and doing our best to get funds lined up and teed and ready to distribute as soon as the program period begins. Same thing for the fall. If you're running a fall program next school year, those would transfer at the beginning of the year in September. A couple quick little things that I want to take questions. So there are resources for multi-year partnerships. Ingenuity worked over 2 years within the arts ecosystem with organizations, with teaching artists, and with arts educators in schools to define a framework for what it means to be a high quality program. And what I've got highlighted here is the organizational quality framework. So if as an arts organization, you are supporting your teaching artists to conduct high quality programs in schools, what are the characteristics of that in terms of building long-term program relationships, especially relevant for those multi-year grants, and then preparing for instruction, executing instruction with a school. So if you are sort of looking to grow that understanding, or you haven't sort of explored these resources before, please go click around and see if there's anything helpful for you. And then lastly, the Lollapalooza Arts Education Fund is a component of the Creative Schools Fund. It launched last year with 50 schools in the first cohort. Those schools have access to additional opportunities like tickets to Lollapalooza, or a banner for their school that talks about the Lollapalooza Arts Education Fund. There's no special application for Lollapalooza grants. It actually is every school that is developing or emerging in their survey, the certification survey, is automatically eligible for the Lollapalooza Arts Education Fund and might become part of that cohort. So just go through the regular application process, and the Lollapalooza notification would come when the grant award is communicated. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing so we can answer questions and hear from you all, thoughts or sort of things that you want to explore more deeply in our last minutes of the call. So who has a question? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, before we do that, I do have 2 event plugs just quickly to chime in on. So just one for arts partners and schools to connect with one another. Partnerships and Learning is hosting that annual Fall Arts Education Summit. So just a quick plug, I'll include a registration link. I think we've already had 63 arts liaisons sign up and over 50 arts organizations. There will be food. It's going to be in person again at Malcolm X College. And this is happening September 28th from 4:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. So I just want to flag that. And second one is I think Eli, Sarah, and I may be hosting office hours next week right before the Creative School Survey closes. And so we're still determining the day, but I am going to guess around Thursday, just right before that survey closes, if you do have even more additional survey questions later on. Okay, thank you. Go ahead. I think Brandon, I think I saw you unmute.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a question in the supplies regard, and I know this is a new thing from last year. I kind of understand the proprietary supplies for teaching artists. For example, we give our students a journal that has a Playmakers Lab sticker on it. So we would get the stickers, but it seems like it's down to the schools to get the journals potentially. And I know also like we normally bring in pencils, which students generally have, but sometimes they don't. So it's nice for us to just have them.
Of course, yeah.
Can you speak a little bit more to how the schools would then purchase the supplies and how they would maybe even get those purchased supplies to the arts organization before they enter the classroom so that they can have prepared them?
Of course. So I would say that branded journals and pencils that are kind of packaged together would not be possible for a school to purchase, and can be built into your purchase order with the school. I think I would refrain from putting that in the supplies line. I would only put in the supplies line as schools what you will yourselves be purchasing. Part of the sort of background on that is that there are specific vendors approved to provide supplies to CPS. And there's this thing called stringing, which is working through another vendor to buy supplies from a vendor that's not approved for CPS purchases. And so that's what the policy is designed to sort of forgo.
Okay, that makes much more sense. And all of our supplies that we had already that I think are proprietary to us are already built in our RFQ and in that.
Perfect. Perfect. That's great. What other questions do you all have?
I had a question about the survey closing and just want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly. So if a school is interested after the survey closes and they reach out and they're like, we would love to partner with you all to work on the grant, they would not be able to do it after the survey is closed.
Yeah, as arts organizations, I would encourage you to encourage the schools that you've spoken about partnering with to complete the survey now.
Okay.
If they reach out to us, we can look at whether there might be a special circumstance, right, Angela, where we could sort of allow a late submission. Yeah.
Okay. That sounds good. Thank you.
Great.
Yes, and just the soft outline right now. I mean, we can talk about it if it needs to be, but it is September 23rd right now. And I know that's coming up relatively quickly.
You said September 23rd or 28th?
Oh, September 23rd is the survey close date. September 28th is the Fall Arts Education Summit. And that's the in-person event to connect with schools and arts organizations.
September 23rd is the survey close date.
Correct.
Okay.
What other questions?
I have a question just following up on that. So the survey closes the 23rd, but it's October 28th is the close date for the application that would come after the survey. Is that correct?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And an application can't be generated until the school has completed the survey. And then that's kind of what starts the process to be coordinated with the arts partner as the next step.
It can actually happen in parallel. You can start filling out the application now before having done the survey. The trouble comes if the application's submitted, but the survey hasn't been completed.
Gotcha.
It would be when we do our eligibility checks, we would have a problem, or we would reach out to see if we can get a survey submitted.
And is this the same time frame as always? I'm just curious if schools are already familiar with this. This is the typical flow. This
is the second year when the survey's been running in the fall, right, Angela?
Okay.
It used to take place in the spring. So it's the second year in the fall. It is, we are not always open concurrently between the survey and the grant application. We did last year, there was some overlap, but we do want this time to really be aligned.
Thank you so much.
So October 28th is when the partners should have their applications into, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
All of the content from the partner and the school should be in by the 28th. And I think we cut it off at 5 p.m., but I'll check on that. We'll probably cut it off at midnight just to be safe. Although we don't want you writing applications at 11 o'clock at night. What other questions do you all have?
Will the application be sent to the schools, to the liaisons or whoever?
So the application is not sent out, but you can find it on our website. I'll put in the web address, and you can just get started right away. There's no sort of like invitation process. You can just create an account and submittable. I'm putting the link in right now. And go ahead and start filling out an application. Think about what partner you want to work with, et cetera.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
My question is, so typically I know that arts liaisons can apply for one CSF grant. If they get it over multiple years, can they still apply the following year? And are there any limits to the number of partner applications that we can join on to?
Yeah, that's a great question. So only one kind of program partnership would be supported per program period. So if a school gets continuous grants for the next 3.5 years, then they would need to wait to apply for future programs. If they're only programming for the next 1.5 years, then next year they could apply for a grant for the program periods after that. We don't have a cap on the number of schools that organizations can partner with, but we do think about that when we're actually putting together a portfolio. We go first by merit, like what is the merit of each application or the program, but we do sort of make sure that we also have kind of a balanced portfolio of partners in terms of culturally and linguistically relevant programs for students, BIPOC-led organizations, and then that there's not sort of an outsized representation of an organization in the portfolio. What other questions do you all have? Great questions.
Go for it, Annie.
So this is Anita. I'm at Robinson and we're pre-K through 3rd grade. So I'm really excited because we rely on Ingenuity. We're a small school and we rely on the funds from Ingenuity to make sure we have arts programming for our students. And because they're so young, we like for them to have exposure to as much as possible. So a couple of things along the lines over the years have come up with that.
Yeah.
Like there's a push now to have an arts teacher on staff. And one, there's a budget restriction for that. And 2, there aren't a lot of people who have arts.
Right.
So this is really not quite related, but I know part of Ingenuity's goal is to make arts sustainable. So some of the things that we've been talking about are that currently ISB does not have an arts endorsement for primary teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Some kind of work we can do around that,
Mm-hmm.
that we can have more sustainable arts in schools.
Yep.
We have a lot of our teachers who said, oh, well, I would get an arts endorsement because as we work together, our teachers have creative movement in the classroom. They're not dance teachers, they're elementary teachers, and they have all been working to incorporate drawing into their lessons. But so I was wondering, like, is there some work around that so that it can be sustainable? Because now we're kind of worried because there's some push for us to hire an arts teacher and put that on budget, but there's no one out there. And right now, if we got an arts teacher on staff, even half-time, we would not be able to have the programming that we have now.
Yeah.
It would actually diminish by getting a person.
Totally hear you. I think that small schools really struggle with that question a lot, whatever the grades they're supporting. We do have a team that works on advocacy and has been working on preparation for arts teachers and how that, collaborating with CPS on this, but how that might be amended or adapted in order to bring more arts teachers into the schools. I will pass along what you just spoke about so that they have that context as well.
Okay, I guess I think there probably needs to be some policy work around changing the arts so that there can be, there aren't any endorsements for primary teachers. All the endorsements are for middle school and up. So they say, oh, you need an endorsed person, but like they don't even offer it. So some advocacy work some policy work that actually needs to happen in education.
Agreed. We agree. I know it's 9:30, so if you all need to go, I'll still stay here and answer questions, but if you have other things you need to do, please go ahead. I don't want to keep you here, but it's good to see you all. Have a great day. Enjoy the partnership building. We'll see you later. Bye. Drive safely.
One more question about the 28th. I'm getting confused with all these dates.
Of course. Yeah, I hear you.
The 28th of September is the deadline for what?
Oh, sorry. Okay, maybe let me lay this out and then Eli, correct me if I'm wrong. Earliest deadline is September 23rd, Creative School Survey deadline.
Okay, let me write this down. Creative School Survey. Okay, that's the 23rd.
September 28th is the Fall Arts Education Summit.
Fall Education Summit. Okay.
And then October 28th is the Creative Schools Fund Fall Cycle Close Date application.
And that's with the partnership and all.
Exactly. Yes. I just put them in chat too.
Oh, thank you, Eli.
For sure. I was typing as you spoke.
Okay, because I'm like, oh my goodness.
I know it's a lot, and you're just starting school and getting the students off the ground. I know it's a lot.
This is my first year. I never did this. This is my first year teaching art, so I'm kind of behind here.
Oh, you're actually in great shape, and we're so glad you're there. Why don't you just reach out to us and we can talk with you offline about any support you need to get those things done.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was gonna say Courtney and I, Courtney is the Director of Partnerships and Learning. We hosted an Art Look session last week, but we're happy to meet with you one-on-one if you'd like some extra support for the first year.
Yeah.
Okay, can I have your email address?
I'll type it into the chat, yes.
Okay, thank you.
What other questions does anybody have?
Okay.
Brandon, is that?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask a question, and I'm trying to figure out also how to phrase this, so this is why I stayed on a little bit later, because it's a little vague. And it just speaks a little bit to like the merit of an application.
Yes.
I know with our work, we've been doing it for 25 years. You know, we have a rigorous assessment. We even participated in the quality cohort with
Awesome.
Ingenuity.
Yes. Great.
And so we know a lot about our program and what works. And sometimes
Yes.
what we struggle with is that partners really just love the partnership the way they are. And so
Yeah.
kind of speaking to like how you're collaborating, what's new is a little bit tricky versus where last year we applied with a new partner who was interested in bringing us and working with a younger grade. And so we were able to adjust that and speak to that as the new. But sometimes it's just that like our long-standing partnerships who would benefit, especially from a multi-year program, we've been working on it and we have the thing that works, and so we struggle a little bit with building a little bit more merit that feels like it's a little under collaboration. And if you have any tips to speak to that, maybe it's speaking to the history of the relationship. I'm not sure.
So I want to make sure I understand. So, and I'm going to turn the recording off so that